talk about affordable housing, and basically look at what's going on in the world of affordable housing, look at where we're at, how we got there, and possible ways to address the very pressing issues that face affordable housing. So what is affordable housing? Just a little definition here. Affordable housing generally means housing that costs 30% or less of area median income, household income. So you can kind of figure out what that means. Just some kind of pertinent information, just kind of as a background. 36.6% of all households right now are renting. That's 43.3 million total households. For the sake of this conversation, I'm going to limit the conversation to the United States. 50% of those are considered rent burden, so they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and that's up from 38% in 2000. And then half of that 50% is considered extremely rent burden, which is paying 50% or more of their income on housing. So it's pretty bad. Then on the homeownership front, homeownership is at a multi-decade low, 64%. It's estimated that we are short of 7.3 million housing units. Basically, to get up to speed and create affordable market conditions, that's how many housing units we would need. Home prices grew year over year in between 2017 and 2016, 6.2%, 2 times income growth and 3 times inflation. And this is a look at total mortgage debt, which is basically about where it was around the bubble. Now, some people have pointed out that this might actually be a sign of healthier market conditions, that people are actually taking on mortgages and are buying houses. But the issue here is there's actually a lot lower volume of housing than in the bubble. So people are saddled with far more mortgage debt. So I just a little. I'll try to move through this quickly here, but just looking at how we got here, because I think in order to understand how we get out of it, it might be better to find out how we got here. So I'm going to start in 1929. Obviously, this is a super tacky slide, but so we have a stock market crash, as everyone all knows, and basically up to that point, the bulk of real estate development had been urban. The car had not taken off, so everyone was kind of limited to certain geographies. They needed to live close to their works. They needed to live close to their family. It was very geographically dependent. But so that's why the vast majority of urban housing, or I don't know if the majority, but you can certainly see the remnants of 1920s, 1910 development. Everywhere you look, this building is probably an example of that. We're still using a ton of the stock that was built pre-1929, but real estate development dropped off a cliff in 1929. This is a Hooverville in Central Park. Like, this is basically what happened in the 30s. Like, people, there was more or less a standstill in development for obvious reasons. So meanwhile, in the 30s, we retooled. We had New Deal, and the nation kind of came back, and then of course World War II came along. We came out as an economic might, and as the soldiers came back, we had the baby booms, we had VA loans. And the factories that had been used for munitions and whatnot were now being redeployed for automobiles, and basically, thus the suburban development model was born. This is in the background is Levittown, kind of one of the first real suburbs, car-dependent suburbs in Long Island. I'm very proud of my graphic design skills. That is Robert Moses, and basically, if you're not familiar with Robert Moses, he was sort of the New York City master planner who really turned New York City into a much more car-centric city, and created most of the major expressways in the area, and made it far more palatable and possible to develop the suburbs. But it wasn't just in New York. So there was a simultaneous phenomena going on. One was the leveling of cities through urban renewal programs. So, ton of the old housing stock was being torn down. This is in San Francisco. This is Boston. So you would get just this massive leveling of cities, losing tons of the housing stock, and making and then creating these urban scapes, like on the bottom right-hand corner there, where there's these tower in the parks, tons of surface parking, and just. And this is really illustrates. This is Detroit in 1951, and that's basically what it looks like now. You can see how it's just basically chopped up by freeways, and I mean, obviously there was a lot of urban blight going on there, but it certainly wasn't helped along by the fact that neighborhoods were just completely torn apart by highways. This is Houston, which is sort of a city that people just think is synonymous with sprawl. This is Houston in 1953. And that's Houston today. And if you look closely, one of the really interesting things here, like this whole quarter over here is all surface parking, and these expressways would just cut through neighborhoods and make kind of create the other side of the tracks. Anyway, and then meanwhile in the city, so this is a pattern that's basically continued to this day with the suburban development. 76% of all housing of American housing stock is single-family housing. The vast majority of what we develop nowadays is single-family housing. But meanwhile, in the cities, there was major pushback from the urban renewal programs. People, didn't want highways. Most famously Jane Jacobs. But there was a tenant right movement that emerged, in the 60s and 70s, that were like, you're not just gonna take my home away and put up a parking lot, so to speak. And essentially, urban housing policy has been calcified in the 70s. And people who bought in the 70s are doing okay, even in the 80s. But development became synonymous with this, with this kind of rapacious program of scorched earth development. So we're paying for the legacy of that. And to this day, there's like the NIMBY, not in my backyard. Like you can't build a project near me. Like sure, I'm all for affordability. I'm all for helping people out, but you can't do it in Park Slope. So nowadays, like this is basically the development climate that we live in. It's super easy to have like greenfield. Basically pick a lot of land and throw up a development, has no relationship to jobs, has no relationship to water. Like this is in Las Vegas. I mean, it's just a fucking abomination. And I was at a conference a couple of years ago and it was like, and it was all these single-family housing developers, and they're like, how do we make more single-family housing work? Like it doesn't work, and I really don't have enough time to get into like even basically how this is subsidized by that the tax base is insufficient to support suburban growth. Like don't even get me started on that. And then this is like a nice mid-rise residential building in San Francisco that probably spent 2 years in committee. So that's basically where we're at in a nutshell. So what can be done? It's obviously FUBAR. What are we going to do about it? So, solution number one: regulation. I wish I could provide a technological magic bullet. There is none. Really, in order for any sort of innovation to flourish, you need supportive government. Like that's one of the real linchpin, I think. This is to kind of illustrate. This is from Ed Glazer, and this looked at the minimum profitable construction costs in San Francisco per unit. This is in 2011. Those prices have gone up considerably. Is $281,000. The minimum profitable construction cost that assumes 17% profit for the developer, plus the fees associated with land use restrictions would equal $800,000. So nearly a 3x premium based on land use restrictions, which includes zoning and approvals and and then just the headache of dealing with community boards and stuff like that. So it's one of the major things driving costs it's particularly in urban environments, and that's why most developers are going to the suburbs, because it's not that great there, although they're dealing with the hard costs there, which I can talk about in a second. So in terms of innovation, I would say this is innovative to me. This is Scott Wiener. He's a state senator in California. California's got perhaps the worst affordable housing crisis in the country. They have the lowest per capita housing units per population. Virtually the whole state is is on fire, literally and figuratively. Scott Wiener proposed SB 827, which is a Senate Bill 827, which proposed to upzone, which means permit higher density in transit corridors. So anywhere, I think it's either a half or a quarter mile within a train or bus stop, single-family house zoned areas could be upzoned that you could build up to 85 stories. It was a big deal in the YIMBY community. That's a woman named Laura Foote Clark who runs SF YIMBY. And the YIMBY is the antonym of NIMBY. It's not yes in my backyard. It's kind of a grassroots pro-development community. And unfortunately, SB 827 was shut down. And there, some people say that it was because of flaws in the plan, and there was a big outcry from. It's interesting with the NIMBYs; they tend to be both the existing homeowners, but also they're often kind of very sympathetic characters. People who might be in rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments. So it's kind of it's a very sticky political situation, but. Scott Wiener had the audacity to try, and he's going to try again next year. And there's reason to believe that this is going to be more normative, as basically as the homeowners die, like as the rental class grows. I mean, there's just more renters now, and they're going to start having a more prominent voice in how how we regulate housing. This is kind of a fun example in Minnesota. They're trying to upzone. This is called a fourplex. It's just a common housing typology there. 4 units in a single-family housing lot. I'm not exactly sure how they deal with parking, and I could probably do a whole presentation on parking, but it's gaining traction, and they're trying to upzone a lot of areas that are currently only for single-family housing. And then closer to home, we have Housing New York, which is the de Blasio administration's plan to bring 300,000 units by 2026, affordable units. And they're, I could go into the nuances of it, but they do seem to be really making an effort. They're looking at a bunch of interesting solutions, such as modular construction. They're looking at tiny houses. They're looking at ways of using underutilized lots. I'm pretty involved with modular construction. And they just launched an RFP last week for Grant Avenue Municipal Lot. So it does seem like they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. Solution number 2, product market fit. So essentially there's been, this is with new housing stock. The red line represents household size. In 1975, I don't know, we have basically around 3 people per household. Now we're record low at 2.55. Fertility rates are at a historic low right now, and yet for single-family housing, the unit size just keeps on growing. So this is emblematic. So in 1950, like I was talking about before, there's 43% of the households were nuclear families, which means a married couple with children who live there. And today, that's about 19%. And just looking at a mismatch of what we build and how people live, we have 28% of people are living alone in the United States, and yet 40% of our housing stock is 3 bedrooms. So actually starting to build housing around the way that people live. So we need less McMansions or fewer McMansions. This is from McMansion Hell, which if you haven't checked it out, please do. And we need more of this. This is from a company called Post Green Homes out of Philly. They do really interesting infill architecture. They work with just creative ways of well, first of all, they kind of move into neighborhoods where you can kind of get in low with the property values, but then they go even further. They make extremely energy efficient homes using kind of simple materials, and they maximize floor plans to reduce construction cost. On the bottom right is actually a project called the 100K home, which was $100 a square foot. So they're doing a bunch of really interesting stuff. This is a project up in the Northwest called Pocket Neighborhoods by an architect named Ross Chapin. It is a suburban development, but it's a suburban development on its kind of turned on its head. It's basically comprised of little bungalows, all about 1,000 square feet, and rather having the frontage of the homes dominated by garages, the frontage of the home essentially is faced towards what would otherwise be the yard. So you have like this, you have a little community house there, and people, it's much more. First of all, the houses are sanely sized, and it's really designed for a community spirit. And then, kind of an urban standpoint, I always get these fucking ads, and it's like, I mean, how many luxury towers do we need? And there's one of my favorite things is all these things say like equal opportunity. From $3.5 million on 100 Barclay and equal opportunity housing, whatever. And already a lot of new units are coming online, like particularly in Brooklyn, and they're going vacant. There's record concessions for rents. Rents are actually starting to go down in Brooklyn and Queens, which actually supports the YIMBY contention that more housing stock drives prices down. Nevertheless, it would be awfully cool if we could start building housing, that what was being developed was a match for what people need. And there still is a huge housing need for the missing middle. And George talked about Common and a lot of the co-living operators. That's where they're gunning for. They're not gunning for the top or the bottom, right in the middle. I know this is a really super unsexy project, but this is something called the Podments in Seattle. They were the micro apartments, and they proliferated in the about 5 or 6 years ago. For the most part, they were regulated out of existence by the YIMBYs, but nevertheless, you could get your own little room with a dinky fridge and microwave and a sink for $525 a month. Someone making $12, $14 an hour could have their own apartment, basically, a safe, clean place, with basic accommodations. This is a new project in Long Island City called The Lanes. Again, just taking a different design approach. They're offering 2 and 3 bedrooms. I think the 2 bedrooms are 490 square feet. And the 3 bedrooms are 7 and change, and the rents I know are, I think, between like $2,500 and $3,500, which for the area is pretty solid. I also think it's just a pretty attractive building. Third solution is what I call new old operating models. One of my favorite things is the residential hotel, and again, this is sort of the victim of the urban renewal programs. Most of the residential hotels, they cater to more transient populations, and most of them are destroyed. But this was and then they kind of devolved, if you will, into the SRO, which is sort of a bureaucratic term that emerged in the 40s. But for a long time, for throughout the 19th century and the early 20th century, the residential hotel was, this a really great multi-use, multi-demographic housing solution, And so this is kind of one of my favorite examples. This is the Barbizon 63. It's at once it was a woman's hotel and housed well, the only one I can think of off my head is Sylvia Plath, but there were a bunch of very famous women who moved through there. It had 700 units, 23 stories at $170 a week in today's dollars. Today, it's been converted to a condo, and it's selling for almost $2,400 a square foot. But we're seeing, this is the Alta by Ollie. They're another co-living operator, kind of a competitor to Common, and so this is a building that's just coming online in Long Island City. 14 of the stories of the 43 stories are devoted to co-living, and basically they've figured out a way of achieving, high density. They're basically getting rid of the living rooms and just filling them up with bedrooms, and then they're furnishing them with transforming furniture to kind of make the space go further. Given that SROs were basically, I think the last SRO was built in 1955, or it was a long time ago now. They were regulated out of existence, but given the zoning that we have, this is the next best thing. Another great solution is ADUs. This is big on the West Coast. Accessory dwelling units. These are basic. Like I said, 76% of the U.S. housing stock is single-family housing. So this is the house behind the house, and you can build. You can build on the lawn of a house. And a couple of startups, Dweller and Small Potato ADU. One of the issues facing people is, they might have a mortgage and they're not necessarily inclined to take on a second mortgage. So these guys will actually help finance and in some cases actually help operate. So if you want to use it as a supplemental rental income, they'll help you with all that. And I think they're even partnering with prefab manufacturers so they can actually pop a prefab in a backyard and make the process all that much more streamlined. This is called Nesterly, which is matching elderly homeowners with cash-strapped millennials, and doing a little bit of bartering services for reduced rent, which I think is a great solution. And again, I could talk about an hour about senior housing. And then lastly, this is, I'll get to the technology, construction development. Probably some of you know that McKinsey came out with a couple reports last year, but sort of stating the obvious. Labor productivity in the construction industry has grown about 1% annually for the last 2 decades versus the 2.8% for the total world economy. And construction spends less than 1% of its revenue on R&D. Versus, for example, 3.5 and 4.5 for the auto and aerospace sector. So it's an exceedingly backwards industry. And not only that, it's there's a dearth of laborers, of construction workers, which compounded by the massive housing needs is stretching thin the limited labor pool, which is driving up the prices. So North America actually has the highest construction wages, and New York takes the cake in the highest in the world, only followed by San Francisco. So it's bad. So what are we doing? There's been a lot of attention on off-site construction. This is actually a company that I work for, Full Stack Modular. And they're doing fully volumetric construction out of the Navy Yard. Kind of using the Lego analogies. They're fully assembled modules that are stacked up. I could talk to you about the bad press on B2, 461 Dean, but like I said, the city is making is pretty bearish on or bullish on modular, and I think we're going to see a real growth in that. And one of the things is like just conventional development, the kind of the siloed approach. There's just sort of a sausage effect. Like you have your construction manager, and you have your architect, and you have your builder, and they're all kind of doing their own thing, and they're not talking to each other. This is a integrated process. This is actually another company that I work for, but they're Panoramic Interest. They're a developer out of San Francisco. They're doing another modular solution. These are Chinese-built modules. They're can be made exceedingly affordable. They can go up. You can build basically do a soup to nuts building in 9 months. And this kind of also relates to bringing back the residential hotel. The modules are all based on intermodal shipping container size, which reduces transit costs, which is a big deal in modular construction, but also provides this really, quite livable space for, it's not necessarily where you're going to want to raise kids, but like, if it beats the alternative, and like, listen, if you're a young person or just any kind of single person, your home might not be the nexus of your universe. I heard a phrase. It's like we need more beds and fewer homes. On the single-family housing front, this is a company I find pretty interesting. They're called Integra. They're out of Ireland. They just raised $45 million a couple weeks ago in a partnership with Louisiana Pacific. And basically, they are making factory-built, machine-built, panelized housing, and they can frame out a house with 3 guys and a crane in 6 hours. And then, a lot of stuff going on with robotics. This is actually Seksui House, which is a big global construction development company. This is in Japan. But they're automating a lot of the repetitive processes of construction, which are so expensive. And this is another one. This is from a company called Construction Robots or something like that. Or Construction Robotics.
Built robotics.
What's that?
Built robotics.
No. It's something extremely descriptive. So again, taking basically one of the reasons why our labor is so expensive is that, or one of the cost to build a house is so expensive is we hire and fire we hire and fire labor based on market undulations, and we don't make the capital expenditures for equipment like this, which cost a fair amount of money, but would drive prices down over the long run. So the takeaways from this. So bet on density. I think there's going to be more and more housing policy that supports greater density, and I think we're going to see more of it in the years to come, and not too far from now, because it's really hitting, reaching a tipping point. Bet on singles and small households. That trend does not seem to be ebbing. People are either not having kids, delaying marriage. The only demographic that saw an uptick in fertility rates in this latest study was like 40 to 45-year-olds. But the rest, it's all been downward slope. So we need housing that meets their needs, and bet on robots, because they're going to take over. So that's it for me. Thanks. I have a newsletter. You can go to hothouse.co. That's my Twitter, and yeah, I'll take a couple questions.